Will you pray with me? God, in these moments, help us to be still and know that you are God and that we don't even need try to be. Settle in us all things that seem unsettled so that we might be open to hear your word for our lives, not only for these moments, but for all the moments to come. Amen. I was called a pessimist this past week. Yep, me, happy-go-lucky Jen, the one who gets comments on the way out of church every Sunday about how cheery I am all the time. But the person who called me a pessimist and accused me of passing that gene along to my son, by the way, has known me for over 20 years, and we have been in a committed relationship for over 17 of those years. Yes, it was Ryan, my husband. But you see, he has known me for more than half of my life, and he would know best, especially since our kids were born, that I don't always have the brightest outlook on things, and I worry incessantly. My inner monologue sounds like a really amped up or twisted version of 20 questions on a fairly regular basis. But what? But how? But where? But why? What's next? What if? I get mired in and frightened by unknown details a lot. For people like me, this summer has been particularly difficult to handle. A summer that began with another shooting spree out in Santa Barbara. Throughout the summer, we heard local news of young adults who died of drug overdoses and car accidents. We watched as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict took off on a roller coaster ride that just keeps on going. We saw the issues surrounding Russia and the Ukraine followed by an Ebola outbreak, the ramping up of conflict again in Iraq, the beginning of a season of mudslinging political ads, the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Robin Williams' suicide, and the heinous acts of ISIL against American photojournalists over this last week. Not to mention all of the things that we know are raging on inside all of you as you come and you bring your concerns and your lives into this worship space on Sunday mornings. I don't know about you, but I am exhausted. I feel a bit beaten down, and I am not sure where we even begin. Last week at the 8:30 service, I began the prayers of the faithful with these words. God, as we come into this time and space of worship, we realize that we do not leave the outside world behind. As we enter through the opening of this outdoor chapel or through the doors of our meeting house, we bring all of the things from our world that are causing us reason for concern. And you ask that we don't leave them all behind, but rather that we enter in and find a word that will speak to us and to our faith about how we are to address those issues and how we are to face them in our everyday lives. You see, friends, one thing about our tradition and the way we worship specifically is that we are called to stay connected to the things of this world, even as we draw ourselves in, enfolding ourselves with these beautiful spaces for worship. We quite literally worship outside in the world during our 8:30 service during the summer, and we have these clear glass windows here in our meeting house, so we are unable to completely shut the world out, even when we are gathered together inside. Over these last few weeks, I have wrestled and struggled with questions about life and faith. I have asked myself how I had the gall to bring 2 young children into a world that is broken, hurting, and downright frightening at times. I have asked myself whether or not it's smart to turn on the news anymore. I have asked myself the same question that many others the world over are asking themselves. What am I, what are we supposed to do? And does it even matter? But that's where I believe 1 Corinthians 13 comes in. Because I suppose I actually know that something's got to give. We can't just sit idly by and allow the world to continue to spiral downward, because if we do, then what kind of world do we leave for our children, our grandchildren, not only our generation, but for generations to come? And what kind of example do we set for people out in the world? If you are like me, then you have heard these words from Paul's hymn of love countless times, perhaps in church school or at weddings or even at funerals. Some of the verses now adorn the walls of people's homes. I even know folks who have them tattooed on their bodies. This is one of those passages, one that we often take or read out of context because it speaks to us so meaningfully as individuals. However, it has such a deeper and broader context than any individual relationship that we might bear witness to. Paul was speaking these words to a community, to a baby church that was trying to figure out how to be faithful among themselves and then how to do that out in the world, about how to address the issues they were facing within their community of believers and those that were contemporary to their time. They were fighting about how best to be church. Yeah, they were fighting about that. And who the best and true followers were of the new way. And Paul pushes them to consider how to be faithful not only for each other and for the church, but for the world of their time. Now that I know what I know about Paul's hymn of love, that it was not written to a couple on their wedding day, but rather to a church in the thick of it, I have difficulty not thinking of it in the context of what it calls people to in community and how it pushes people to act out in the world. Let's face it, many of the things that Paul writes about what ideal love is seem pretty contradictory to the way our society functions now. Love is not arrogant or boastful or rude, he says. It's not envious. It does not rejoice in its own way or in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. We live in a world where oftentimes the loudest, flashiest, most photoshopped way is held in very high esteem. And Paul instead calls for something genuine, a kinder, more patient way, something that is not hop to it easy, but rather difficult at times. He calls his people, his fellow believers, us, to a life lived with this kind of love as the basis for all we do, as the motivating factor in all the words we say, in all the actions we take, in all the ways we direct our attitudes and our intentions, not only for us in the way it will help us to feel and act and be, but for the building up of the community around us. You may have seen it on the news if you are a news watcher, but there was a meeting on Friday night at one of our sister churches in Hartford at Faith Church, where Reverend Steve Camp invited others from around the Connecticut conference, the mayor of Hartford, the governor, and chiefs of police from the area, as well as concerned citizens to come have a conversation about life in our cities, about relationships between officials and everyday citizens, and about hope for a better way. Now, Steve, of course, put this together in response both to the news from Ferguson, but also because of a local instance in Hartford and because of the questions of his own teenage daughter about why life is this way in the city they call home. We heard eloquent words from the officials and the chiefs of police first, and then many of the concerned citizens from the area rose with impassioned pleas for their neighbors to act in ways that would make their city safer, and pleas to the elected officials there to help address the underlying issues that springboard violence in many of our cities, issues of hunger and race relations, housing, unemployment, living wages, and education for all. Now, we tend to think in small town Connecticut that these issues do not apply, but many of them do, and others most certainly do. Friends, we have had kids dying from drug overdoses, others in reckless driving events, and still others wondering whether it is worth living at all, because some of those opportunities are not out there for them if they didn't have the best of grades or weren't super athletes, or because they've not felt the kind of love either from their friends or their community that Paul espouses us to. Yes, friends, I believe that something has got to give. We need to press pause. We need to press pause in our personal relationships, in our community, both here within the church and outside those clear windows and in the world. If we go on living the way that we are, then what will happen? We need to press pause before we say some of the things we wish to say in reaction to others. We need to press pause before we send on that email that blasts someone. We need to press pause before we share our views about hot-button topics like politics and religion with others, knowing that in order to have any kind of rational conversation, especially one in regard to something about which we are passionate, it needs to be done in a way that allows for the building of bridges and the building up of community. We need to press pause before we make those little off-to-the-side remarks without thinking about how they might affect others around us. We need to press pause because everything in this life is about relationships, whether we like that fact or not. And everything we say and do can either build up or break down those relationships. I don't think Jesus or Paul or any of our other forefathers and foremothers in faith ever said that the life of faith, living the way that Paul is envisioning in this passage from the letter to the Corinthians, was going to be easy. They did say it was going to be worth it. They help us, as we look back at their words and actions, to realize that faith and love, although they are nouns, are also very active verbs. They call us to a still better way. I can't help but believe Paul thought that if he could get this community of believers in Corinth to act this way, to think before they spoke and acted, to have their underlying motivation be a love that was patient and kind and helpful rather than hurtful, that they would also influence the society around them. That is what we are called to do. To think and act in ways that help to build up the community, address the issues that are out there in a way that invites others to the table instead of making them run screaming from those crazy Christian folks that are coming after them. And to make people want to figure out what the difference is between a life lived out of love and faith and one that is focused only on the things of this world. So I left that meeting on Friday night reflecting on the things that I am passionate about and how I might work to address those issues in the community in which I live, in this community, and in our state and in our world. I challenge all of us to do that today and in the days ahead. What gets you really steamed up or really excited? How can you use your gifts to address those issues? Are there ways to become more informed or advocacy possibilities or hands-on opportunities to serve that might help in some way? I may be a pessimist, but I guess I'm a hopeful pessimist, if that's even a thing, because I believe that there is a better way and a better life that can be offered and worked toward, not just off in some far-off future world that we don't yet know of, but in the here and now. But that life might require a new movement of what I am dubbing Jesusic proportions, if you will. It requires both pressing the pause button and cultivating lives based on the motivation of love. Agape, community-minded, patient, kind, enduring, hopeful love. I am willing to work on that, not only for my sake, but for the sake of all of you and of my children and of your children. I may not always get it right, but I'm willing to try. Paul says that in some future time, we will see clearly God's vision. We will see God face to face. I am equally excited and frightened about what we might see when that time comes. But I am hopeful that we can work toward a glimpse of that kingdom here on earth in the here and now, not needing to wait until that day, all those many years from now. So may we use our passions, our gifts, our words, our actions, our love to make that glimpse happen. Amen.